The rain tapped softly against the wide windows of the city library, more melody than noise. Inside, silence reigned, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of a turning page or the faint echo of shoes on polished wood. It was the kind of place where secrets could hide between the lines of a book and people could exist beside one another without ever speaking a word. Ion came here every day. Same table, same seat, near the poetry section where the light hit just right and the silence wasn't lonely. He wasn't one for conversations. Words often betrayed him, stumbling on his tongue, especially when feelings were involved. Instead, he sketched. With charcoal fingers and a quiet heart, he poured everything he couldn't say onto the pages of his journal. Then she arrived. Zoya. He noticed her before he knew her name. She walked in with a certain kind of calm, like someone who wasn't searching for escape, but peace. She headed straight for the poetry aisle, her fingers brushing gently across worn spines before she pulled out the same book each time, Pablo Neruda's 20 Love Poems and a Song of Despair. Their first encounter wasn't dramatic. No accidental collision of books. No shared laugh or instant conversation. Just a moment, a flicker. Zoya looked up and caught him staring. Not awkwardly, just curiously. Their eyes met for half a breath, and then she smiled. Not the full kind, just a small, polite curve. But Ion didn't forget it. He didn't sketch that day. Instead, he kept seeing that smile every time he closed his eyes. Days passed. Weeks, maybe. She kept coming. Always at the same hour. Always with that book. Sometimes she'd read. Sometimes she'd write in a small green notebook. Ion wondered what words lived in there. Were they about him? He never asked. One afternoon, she stood up quickly, startled by her phone ringing. Her notebook slipped from her lap and landed just inches from his foot. He picked it up carefully, hesitating only a second before holding it out to her. Their fingers brushed. She thanked him with her eyes, nodding once before clutching the book to her chest. Ion didn't respond. He just gave a faint smile and went back to his sketching. But something shifted after that. He began sketching her. Never directly. Always from memory. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. How her eyebrows arched when she was deep in thought. The way she seemed to fold herself into the pages of poetry. Zoya started noticing him too. The way he never spoke, yet always seemed to say something through his hands. She'd glance at his journal as she passed by, curious but respectful. They never spoke. Not once. And yet, something unspoken began to bloom between them, like the first petal of a flower nudging its way out in early spring. It started with a sketch. Ion left it quietly, tucked inside the pages of the book Zoya always picked. It was a simple drawing, an outline of the library's tall windows, two small figures seated across from one another, a rain-speckled world just beyond the glass. When Zoya found it, her breath caught. There was no signature, but she knew. Somehow, she knew. Her eyes drifted across the room to where he always sat, head down, pencil moving in soft strokes, never looking up. She slipped the sketch into her notebook and left without a word. The next day, she left something of her own. A bookmark, handwritten in her delicate script, pressed between the pages of Ion's sketchpad when he stepped away for a moment. Just a few lines of poetry. You draw silence so beautifully that I forget the world ever spoke. When Ion returned and saw it, he didn't smile right away. He stared at it for a long moment, the words sinking in slowly, like ink on paper. Then, almost shyly, he turned the page and began to draw again, this time with a touch more warmth in every stroke. They never spoke, but their exchange continued. One day, she left a folded paper crane made from a page torn from an old novel. Inside it, she'd written, "Sometimes I wonder what your voice sounds like." Ion replied the next day with a sketch of a faceless girl sitting beneath a tree, holding a book titled Answers in Silence. It became their language, this dance of ink and paper. A quiet intimacy growing between tables, between moments. They began sitting closer. Not across the room anymore, but across from one another. Still no words. Still no names. But every glance held a paragraph. Every smile, a chapter. Zoya started to notice the little things, how his left eyebrow twitched when he concentrated, how he chewed the end of his pencil when lost in thought. Ayan, in turn, noticed how she hummed under her breath when reading, how her lips moved silently as she memorized lines of poetry. On a rainy afternoon, the library lights flickered. The storm outside had grown heavy. Zoya sneezed, once then again. Ayan, without looking up, reached into his coat pocket and slid a small packet of tissues across the table. She stared at it, surprised. Then at him. He didn't speak. He simply continued drawing. She took the tissues, whispered a soft thank you, knowing he probably wouldn't reply, and somehow, it didn't matter. He had already answered in his own way. In that shared silence, something more powerful than words began to unfold. A comfort, a closeness, an understanding. The kind of love that doesn't ask to be declared loudly. The kind that lives gently between the line. The library felt emptier that day. Ayan sat at his usual spot, pencil in hand, but the strokes refused to come. He kept glancing at the poetry aisle. Zoya wasn't there. For the first time in weeks, her seat remained untouched. The familiar green notebook didn't rest on the table. Her presence, so quietly constant, was now an aching absence. The library's silence, once comforting, now felt heavy. He waited. Minutes stretched like hours. He flipped through his journal, stopping at every sketch of her, each one now a memory instead of a moment. As the light began to dim with the setting sun, Ayan pulled out a fresh page. He sketched quickly, furiously, like his heart needed to bleed something out. Zoya, sitting by the library window, rain outside, her eyes looking into a world only she understood. But this time, he didn't finish her smile. He left her face uncertain, open-ended. Below the drawing, he wrote his first real sentence to her. I miss you when you're quiet, even more when you're gone. He tore the page out carefully, folded it once, and placed it inside her favorite poetry book, the same one she'd pulled from the shelf dozens of times. Then he left, heart heavy but hopeful. The next day, she came. Ayan looked up the moment she entered. Something about her was different, her expression softer, eyes red around the edges. She held the sketch in her hand, folded but not hidden. Without a word, she walked over to him and sat down across the table. For a moment, she just looked at him, not searching, not questioning, just knowing. Then, slowly, she slid her green notebook toward him and opened it to a page she'd marked with a pressed daisy. Her handwriting was slightly shaky. You speak without sound, and I hear you clearer than anyone. I read your heart in every line. I don't need your voice to know that I'm yours if you'll be mine. Ayan stared at the words. His heart thundered in his chest, louder than any voice ever could. He looked up at her, his lips parting slightly, but the words caught like they always did. So instead, he reached across the table. He gently took her hand in his, fingers warm, trembling real. Their eyes locked. Silence fell again, but this time it was alive. Full. Sacred. After a long pause, Ayan finally spoke. Just one word, barely louder than a whisper. Stay. Zoya didn't answer with words. She squeezed his hand. And that was enough. In that quiet library, beneath flickering lights and behind stacks of books, two souls who had written their love in sketches and poetry finally found the courage to hold it. Not in grand declarations, but in one small, trembling word. The days that followed felt different, softer somehow, like the world had finally slowed to match their pace. Ayan and Zoya didn't change overnight. They still visited the library, still sat in silence side by side. But now the silence carried meaning. It wasn't an absence of words anymore. It was full of them, full of presence, of comfort, of peace. They didn't rush. There were no loud proclamations or sweeping gestures. Just quiet afternoons, shared books, passing smiles, and the occasional brush of hands that lingered a little longer each time. Sometimes, Zoya would read softly to him, verses from Neruda or her own poems, her voice barely above a whisper. Ayan would listen with closed eyes, as if memorizing her voice in layers. And when he sketched now, it was different too. Looser, brighter, as if her presence gave shape to the parts of him that had been stuck in the shadows. One afternoon, they found themselves caught in a sudden downpour just outside the library. No umbrella, no escape, just laughter, hers bright, his rare and quiet, and a mad dash to the nearest cafe. Soaked, they sat in a corner booth, steam rising from their coffee cups. Zoya watched him, waiting. She didn't push. Never did. Ayan cleared his throat, nervous but willing. "I used to be afraid," he said slowly, carefully, each word chosen like a step on uncertain ground. "Of saying things wrong, of being too much, or not enough." Zoya reached across the table, her fingers wrapping around his. "You never needed to say a word," she said. "I've heard you, from the start." He smiled. Not the faint, polite kind from weeks ago, but a full one, soft and honest. Later that week, he gave her something. A new sketchbook, wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Inside the cover, in his now familiar handwriting, it said, "Our story, written in silence." She didn't say anything right away. She just pressed her forehead to his and breathed in the moment. And that was enough. They kept coming to the library after that. It became more than a habit, it became their place. Where it all began. Where words were never required to fall in love. In time, the other patrons noticed them. The quiet boy and the poetry girl. No one ever heard much from them. But anyone watching closely would have seen the way he pulled her chair out before she sat. The way she marked his page when he stepped away. The way they looked at each other like every second mattered. And maybe that's what love is, after all. Not loud. Not dramatic. But still, undeniable. Final narration, voiceover ending. They say love shouts from rooftops. But theirs whispered from across a wooden table, beneath library lights and between dog-eared pages. In their silence, they found everything they needed, and everything they never thought they'd have. Love doesn't always speak. Sometimes it simply stays.